This is one of my very favorite topics to talk about. And this is one of those things that once you know it, it may solve a bunch of problems that you have and may even save your sexual relationship. So if you are a sexual person, which you're here, so probably you are, there is something super important that I want you to know. And this is that there are two different ways that we may be wired for desire. Some of us are wired to have spontaneous desire, and others are wired to have responsive desire. Spontaneous desire, for many people, feels like it comes like a bolt of lightning. You might be sitting at the office or home office, or you might be washing the dishes, and suddenly, boom, the desire to get sexy comes on. You might immediately want to masturbate, you might want to have sex with your partner, and it feels like it comes out of nowhere. Or you're ready to go like at the drop of a hat. You want to have sex? Yeah, great, let's do it. Awesome. That is normal. This is the type of desire that we see modeled for us in romantic comedies, certainly what we see modeled for us in porn, and it is normal. A lot of people are wired this way, but not everyone. Some of us, myself included, and my partner, are responsive. This means that we don't often or we never feel that kind of innate impulse of like, I'm horny, I want to do it. Responsiveness means you could be responsive to all sorts of things. It could mean that you saw, you got a bunch of flirty text messages from your beloved and it kind of warmed you up. It could be that you scheduled sex ahead of time and you know that Saturday is the day to play. And so all day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you've been thinking about what you might do and how it might feel and what might feel good. And so by Saturday, your desire kind of builds a little bit. The other way responsive desire manifests is that sometimes we don't feel desire until we already get going. So for a lot of us, we may find that I don't feel horny, I don't feel desirous, I don't feel amorous, and so then I don't want to pursue sex with my partner because a lot of us, understandably, based on our lack of education and the media and all of these things that were kind of shown about kind of how desire looks for most of us, a lot of that is wrong. And so if we don't feel horny or if we don't desire it kind of innately, we may feel like something is wrong or we're broken or maybe something's wrong with the partnership and my partner is not sexy enough or I'm not sexy enough. We internalize a lot of this, right? But knowing that once you get started, it might be really awesome. So if you have ever said something like, I want it more, or, once I have sex, I realize I like it a lot, or I really wonder why I don't do it more often. So if you find yourself or have found yourself ever saying something like that, you are more than likely responsive. Again, we don't have a lot of models for what this looks like in media or romantic comedies. So below in the written portion of this, because I did a video and written for this one because it's so important, you can see a little bit more about how this might work. So, you know, this idea that like I want it more could be related to a lot of things, right? If your partner and you are having sex that you actually don't like, you're not going to want it. If you're having sex that is painful or harmful in some way, you are not going to want it. If we're going through the natural and deleterious hormone fluctuations of perimenopause and menopause, you may not want it, right? So there might be other things happening, but generally, responsive desire means that we need to think of other ways to kind of put our brain in the space to be willing to be turned on, right? So, for example, scheduling sex is something that's fraught for a lot of people. I am a big fan of it. And so my partner and I will say like, hey, on Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, like let's spend the afternoon fooling around. And sometimes that starts with a nap. Sometimes that starts with cuddling. Sometimes that starts with going for a walk or having a long conversation. But part of that is really like giving ourselves over to the space and allowing the turn on and the arousal to build. Sometimes it builds early on and I start touching him and I really like it. And other times it takes a little bit more time where we're like pretty actively engaged. This doesn't mean that you're having sex when you really don't want to, but it's this willingness, right? Like I don't feel super aroused, but I like this person, I miss this person, I want to be naked with this person. I am willing to participate in this sexual encounter and be curious about whether or not my desire will come online. So there's definitely some balance to this in a partnership because if we don't know how we're wired, we may be confusing our, desire or lack of desire for this responsiveness. And if our partner is spontaneous, they might get frustrated if we can't find our arousal or can't get there in any specific thing. That is a challenge to be worked through, and a good therapist or a good coach can help you have those types of conversations and better understand how to work with however you and your partner are wired. Most of us are attracted to people who are opposite. So, a lot of times, mismatched libido or kind of lack of desire in relationship comes down to this type of situation. In my case, my partner and I are both responsive, which means that unlike other relationships I've been in where the other person is more spontaneous, sometimes my partner and I both need to do a little bit of work to kind of bring each other out of our shell. So sometimes I have to be really direct and say, I would really like to make love. And sometimes it comes a little bit organically, or sometimes he asks me. So we have this like counterbalance of how do we engage with each other, knowing that it doesn't just hit us like a bolt of lightning. The other thing that I want to talk about here is that, like, knowing that pleasure will happen, again, if we're in a context of a relationship where we like the sex that we're having, Dr. Emily Nagoski reminds us that sometimes we just need to get in bed with our person and remember, oh, yeah, like this feels good. This feels good to be naked. This feels good to be touching them. This feels good to be touching myself, whatever it might be. So, chasing pleasure, like what might feel good in my body, is very different. And I would say more mature or evolved way of exploring sex, especially in a long term partnership. But chasing that pleasure, like what might feel good? How can we feel good in our body instead of feeling like, oh, I have to be horny to have sex? I'm also creating related content around this that's dozens of different reasons why one might want to have sex, and that includes it was a holiday, or it was a celebration, or it was a birthday, or I missed feeling my body, or I missed feeling my partner's body. And the difference is that it's not like, oh, I want this, but it's like, I want to have this feeling, or I want to fulfill this craving, or I want to celebrate in some way. So there's lots of different reasons why one might want to have sex, lots of different ways to find your access point to it, and lots of different conversations to have with your babe to figure out kind of where you both are on this scale. So, again, spontaneous kind of feels like a bolt of lightning, hits you out of nowhere, ready to go at a drop of a hat. Responsive means a little bit more broad. You might need something to turn yourself on in lots of different ways. Text messages, context, scheduling, different types of engagement, and lots of other ways to play are welcome on the table. I hope this is helpful. If you have a question about this, please drop it below. Like, this is such a powerful part of knowledge when it comes to couples. And before I wrap up, I'll share a short example. Somebody reached out to me the other day and they said, my husband will just like kind of look at me at bedtime and say like, I'm ready to have sex. And this person is, their partner is not ready to because of all sorts of different things, because they're tired, because they want to go to bed, because they're not ready, because they don't want to. So knowing that the first person who's asking is probably a little bit more spontaneous, whereas the other person's maybe a little bit responsive, will hopefully help them figure out how to understand the differences. That can be really helpful, but also understand that the person who's more responsive might need a little bit more than just like a off the cuff invitation. I always tell people, like, we are not light switches. We cannot just turn ourselves on because somebody else wants us to, right? There's so much context, especially in a long-term partnership with kids and jobs and all the sorts of other pressures we face. So just know that if you have experienced this, you are not alone. This is very common, it's very normal, and also there are absolutely ways to solve it. Hope this is helpful.